Uh, Joining us again is a man who is no stranger to the Observer, political scientist, Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath. A pleasant good evening to you, sir.
Good evening. Pleasure to be back on your program.
Yes, a lot has happened since we uh, last spoke. The UNC internal election gets going. There are two slates, of course, and a lot is being said at this point in time. Looking at it, let's say from someone from the outside looking in, what are we witnessing and what is up for grabs?
Well, what we are witnessing is simply that the UNC as a political party is seeing itself and is probably viewing the current political landscape as one which is ripe for the taking of power away from the PNM. And it is in that context now that there's this jostle for position and power by its members to try to see whether or not they could actually change the course of history and to that extent ensure that they are part and parcel of a government whenever that government is formed. So that is basically what this is all about right now. The question, however, begs is simply, having said all of that, to what extent are the current slates of candidates who have offered themselves, to what extent are they attractive to the general membership of the UNC, who will then select them to go forward?
Now we spoke to the current one of the current political deputy leaders, which is Dr. Rudal Munilal, and the question posed to him was, once all is said and done and the dust settles, there has to be some unifying factor to bridge everything after all is said and done. He said, of course, it's all about political battle, but at the end of it all, it's one UNC moving forward. Is that easier said than done?
It is easier said than done because from where I sit, there are various options that are available to many people who may not necessarily be victorious in an upcoming battle. So in such a context, while it is easy to say that once the election is over with, we'll put our bygones away and we will start looking at how we work together, there's a whole big question of some of the things that may very well be said between now and that poll that could literally damage the party in a serious way before we could talk about rebuilding and coming together again.
And of course, when you look at what Mr. Parry is saying, he is saying that his slate's commitment to the party was unwavering. He also viewed the current challenges in the party as opportunities in disguise and not obstacles. Is he still playing it as diplomatic as possible? Is there that political reality has not set in as yet that, the main fact is that you called for the internals, the internals has been called, now it's happening. Are you willing to abide by what the results are and simply move on? Or are we going to be seeing more of this taking place as far as forming alliances outside? And when I say that, I talk about, of course, Michaela Panday and Her Patriotic Front party.
Okay, so, and that is really the critical issue here as we move forward in this internal election for the UNC. While Mr. Parry would now come out and say that he will support and stay with the party and work with the party and so forth, we must also be cognizant of the fact that Mr. Parry has also been one of those people who have been very critical of the leadership of the current leadership of the UNC, which is not going to change. And the question that begs is simply, if you are not going to be supportive, or if you are not currently supportive of that leadership, and that leadership does not change, where does that leave you? And would you be willing to simply sit down and, because you have said it, I mean, it has been said many a time that under the current leadership of the UNC, they could not, they don't see the party winning an election. Will a candidate or will a personality like Mr. Parry be willing to say, okay, fine, if the party chooses and I lose the election and my slate loses the election, we will now sit down humbly back and work with Kamala Prasad Desai, knowing full well that you have already declared that her chance of winning a general election is more or less nil. So this is where the real concern will come about for the Mr. Parry and the as deciding whether or not they are willing to remain in opposition, because that's what they have said, that's the outcome that they expect will happen. Whether they are willing to remain in opposition or whether they want to try and improve their chances to serve in government with another vehicle.
Yeah, and again, I think that it's a bit of a, well, I shouldn't say too much of a challenge, but again, looking from the outside, if you're looking in, there's so much mixed narratives, because here it is, Mr. Parry is also saying that he emphasized that the enemy was not the UNC or his colleagues on the other side, but the People's National Movement, the PNM, which he said destroyed the economy and every independent institution. Then why wasn't that the priority and your focus, rather than sort of trying to create something within the party that could destabilize and in some way or the other get the perception of weakness?
Well, you see, and that is where the challenge comes in for the UNC as they move forward, because they will really have to determine whether they could trust Mr. Parry's perception and positioning, which seems to be now changing somewhat based on the fact that he's now recognizing that it is not a simple walk in the park, that he could simply walk in there and take away the leadership away from Kamala Prasad Desai and her supporters. So he has now to reevaluate where he is, and in such a reevaluation, it could be very well be detrimental to him and his colleagues in his grouping as to whether or not they stand a good chance at making that change that they really want to make.
Yeah, and you're right. And again, it does come across a bit confusing, because even on the platform, which is an internal election, on the platform he's talking about crime, he's talking about home invasions, he's talking about all of these issues, of course, which one would expect that the current administration to address. And if these are issues that you definitely are aiming at, one would think that you would simply be working side by side with your party, with your colleagues, and to deal with those issues. And somewhere along the line, sometime maybe in the near or distant future, once it raises its head that it's time to have a challenge, then so be it. But why now? I mean, did he lose sight of the forest as far as beyond the trees, or what have you?
Well, this is where part of the challenge comes up, and in trying to understand what was Mr. Parry's intention. When, for instance, way back in March or whatever, he called upon the leadership of the party to call the internal elections and so on. I am not sure whether he was of the belief that in making such a call at that point in time, he was probably of the belief that the party will not call an election, and that would give him some degree of a jumping off platform. Of course, what he probably now realizes is that he's not in a party where there are simply, where there are seasoned politicians, maybe I should put it like that, where there are seasoned politicians who probably are not as naive as he is. And his naivety clearly came out to play early on. And this is where he now has to treat it with critical issues as he moves forward. So, for all intents and purposes, Mr. Parry has literally locked himself into a barrel, if I may use that concept. He has locked himself into a barrel where there's very little room to maneuver now that the leadership of the UNC has decided to call his bluff. They look, we're going to call the elections. They have called the elections, and now they are ready and willing to take him on into battle, which I don't think he had expected.
Yeah. What's interesting here, moving forward, of course, gearing up for the 2025 general elections, is that Michaela Panday has made it quite clear that her party, the Patriotic Front, is open to listening to other parties, but if there's to be any thought of a coalition, the purpose cannot solely be to beat the PNM, but on the foundation of wanting to improve the quality of life for the population. Now, here's where there's a problem. I mean, if you're saying that it's not wholly and solely about beating the PNM, but offering, policies and programs that are going to improve the lives of the citizenry, you don't have such a track record or body of work to show that you've actually been there and connected with many of these social ills that the citizens are facing. Is she basically overselling or trying to sell something that really and truly she may not be able to even bring forward as far as basic information as to how to better the lives of citizens?
Well, this is where Michaela Panday, there's a credibility gap in when we look at Michaela Panday. Michaela Panday is untested in terms of electoral politics. In 2020, or leading up to the 2020 election, she came out and said, I'm going to contest the election. And then lo and behold, as we got closer into the elections, she withdrew and said, well, look, we wouldn't contest the elections this time around. So there's that credibility gap. Now that she says, I'm going to fight all 41 seats, we don't have any guarantees that her claim to want to fight all 41 seats will come about. In fact, if we had to follow based on what we've seen of her in the past, we may very well say, well, look, she's just saying that for the sake of saying that at this point in time, come closer to the election, she might very well bow out. And in fact, in another forum yesterday, I had reason to tell people, I said, what people don't understand is the cost of elections and the cost of contesting elections. I mean, this might be a totally different issue than what we're discussing here today. But when you consider that any party who wants to contest 41 constituencies has to immediately place into the account of the government $205,000, because it costs $5,000 per candidate to get nominated and to get onto that ballot paper. That in itself is a sizable amount of money for any political party which is now contemplating contesting an election. So those are the kinds of things that you now have to look at. And will the Patriotic Front, which Ms. Panday leads, will it be able to mobilize the sufficient support to raise that kind of revenue, to raise that kind of money to use in a campaign as it is right now? And that I see as a bigger problem for Michaela Panday. Is she expecting that candidates who will offer themselves to be candidates with her party, that they will fund their own campaign? If that is the expectation,
No,
I could tell her that
that's a very good point, Dr. Raghunath. I'm glad you went into that direction because, you know, there are many people who seem to overlook that for whatever reason. It costs money. A campaign costs money. Let's get down to the core facts of the matter here. It costs money. I mean, one constituency that can be deemed a marginal takes a lot of money in order for you to actually win. And it's not cheap. But based on that as well, compounded with the fact that we have not heard any of her policies as far as dealing with home invasions, as far as dealing with citizens who need to have access to guns, as far as the economy, as far as the education, healthcare system. We have heard absolutely nothing. And then you jump out, and as you mentioned before, we've seen this game before. I'm coming out, and then you pull back in. I'm thinking about it. And one has to wonder, okay, how can we take this serious with the fact that do you have the money that it takes? Plus, do you have the policies? Have you done your research? Are you going to present something that is an alternative that people are going to gravitate to and say, you know what you're talking about, and once you get into office, you know exactly what you're going to do to make my life better? Should this be taken seriously or not?
And that is a serious question. Should they be taken seriously? When we say that we're talking here about, particularly about the picture at the front. But in that context, you see, part of the challenge that Michaela Panday faced, I think, is that she rode a wave of sympathy when Bishnu Panday passed earlier this year. That wave of sympathy, however, I think has diminished and literally has gone out of existence. So whereas she may be thinking that that may still carry her somewhere, calling on the name of her father all the time doesn't necessarily mean that people will trust her, people will want her. And those are some of the concerns that the population will have when it comes to treating with Michaela Panday as we move forward. Now, I'm not saying that she doesn't have the possibility. I mean, we write her off or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is simply there seems to be a credibility gap that until that gap is not fixed and people are convinced that yes, she's serious and yes, she's going to actually contest an election, then until that time, people are not going to give her the kind of support that I think she thinks that she deserves.
Yeah, and I agree with you because really and truly, I mean, what are you bringing to the table? And again, your track record. I mean, have you connected with many of the things that are happening? And we're not seeing that. So moving forward, we definitely have to look at how these things may turn and how things may go leading up to the 2025 general elections. And finally, from me, I mean, when you look at everything that's playing out here, these are some very interesting times. What do you think may be one of the big shockers leading up to the general election 2025?
Well, I don't think it's much of a big shock. I think what we will probably see leading up to 2025, it could be two things. One, where several smaller parties, such as the Michaela Panday and so on, may very well throw their hat in the ring. And if they do so, with the intention or with the hope not of winning an election, but rather of keeping the PNM in office, because that will be the ultimate outcome of such a move. So that is one possibility. The other shocker will be in the event that what we could see is we could still see some sort of accommodation between political parties, amongst political parties, which will lead to that position that the emphasis and the focus is simply in removing the PNM at all costs. And if that is the case, then there will be those such a coalition of parties. Whether that comes to pass or not, we really have to wait and see. But as at this point in time, those are the two things that I would look forward to as the possibilities.
Again, that's a bit tricky because, I mean, if you're talking about people who are just hell-bent on being somewhat vindictive and just simply saying, listen, if I can't have it, you can't have it, and they're out to spoil someone's victory, then would they ever, at any point in time, were they ever interested in the needs and the interests of the people? Was it ever about the people if we ever get down to that?
Well, that is the real question, and that is one of the questions I think Mr. Parry and his group will have to answer. If and this is, I mean, all of these are big ifs. If, for instance, his party, his slate should lose the internal, will he remain committed to the UNC, or will he, as in fact several of us have suggested thus far, that there's a good possibility that he may very well decide to abandon the UNC and join arms with the Patriotic Front, and then the question will need to be answered. Is it really that you are interested in because if he does that, and maybe I should expand on that, if he does that, and he is able, and this is one of the key points, if, for instance, Mr. Parry, he comes from the constituency of Miaro, if Mr. Parry, from the Miaro constituency, decides to jump ship and join another political entity, and that entity he could carry with him, let's just say, 1,000 supporters who would have supported the UNC in the last general election. That ability to move, or that capacity to move with 1,000 electors, will definitely give the PNM a stronger chance at regaining the Miaro constituency when you come back up to the next election. So it's a matter of and that is what people are going to be looking at, as to whether or not he was really interested in removing the PNM, or if he cannot be part and parcel of that a government that will remove the PNM, will he be the one who will be seeking to ensure that the UNC does not succeed?
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to thank you so much again for taking time out to link with us. Always enlightening, and we will be checking in with you periodically. Keep up the good work, and best of luck to you and your entire team, Dr. Ragoonath.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much.